welcome to Let's Talk Decarbonisation with me, Matt Stadden. I'm very pleased to say that today we have two guests, Josie, Wardle and Alistair Barnes of Innovate UK. We'll be getting a sense of what they do, how this fits into the fight against climate change over the course of the next 20 minutes or so. So welcome to you both. Let me start with you, Josie. Could you just explain very briefly what exactly Innovate UK is?
Innovate UK is an arm's length government organisation that helps businesses to take great new ideas and turn them into realistic products and services. And obviously, Alistair and I both work in the decarbonisation of transport space. So we're helping companies to develop new products and services that can help us to decarbonise our transport system in the UK.
And Alistair, could you put it into the context of UKRI, which is UK Research and Innovation?
Certainly. So Innovate UK is one of the parts of UKRI. So UKRI has a number of different research councils that work in different areas. So some are focused more on universities, some are focused more on business, and particularly Innovate UK works closely with business on the sort of the medium technology readiness level concepts. So things that are starting to be commercialised.
Josie, just describe your role at Innovate UK. What is it that you do?
I work closely with government and with academia and businesses right across the UK to look for good solutions to help to roll out more charging infrastructure across the UK, to make sure that we have the right things in the right places to power the vehicles of the future.
And Alistair, same question to you. What's your role?
So I'm the innovation lead for zero emission vehicles. I work particularly on the vehicle side, so anything to do with propulsion technology, and with a really heavy focus on decarbonisation. So these days, Innovate UK is almost exclusively focused on low or zero emission technology, so less on hybridisation and more on battery electric vehicles or maybe hydrogen fuel cell vehicles.
Josie, Innovate UK works very closely with businesses in this country, and I want to get a sense from you whether you feel that the penny is dropping with British business in the fight against climate change, and that people are actually excited about the possibility to innovate and to make money, to make profit from tackling the crisis facing us.
Well, definitely, yes. In my space, we have a lot of both large and small businesses in the UK that are heavily focused in this space. And we see a great opportunity for new business, not just for inside the UK, but also to export a lot of those products and services internationally. And in fact, we in the UK are leading the way in some of those areas in EV charging ahead of the rest of the world, and helping to share our best practice more widely, which opens up more opportunities for UK businesses to export, obviously.
Alistair, how big a part of tackling climate change is the transport sector, and how effectively are we tackling climate change through transport in the United Kingdom?
It's a big question, really, because transport is a huge part of the UK's emissions. And typically when we think about transport, we think about passenger cars, because that's generally what we're all used to. But a large proportion of the emissions from transport come from heavy goods vehicles or off-highway sector, or even maritime, and that includes sort of the international long sea travel. So it's a really significant part of UK emissions. And it's really important, I think, for everyone to think just a little bit wider than passenger cars and what they do. Think about the sort of the goods that come to where they live, and the sort of the slightly behind the scenes elements of transport.
So as to what is Innovate UK doing to help decarbonise HGVs, heavy goods vehicles?
We work with a number of organisations, but the main focus and the main funding that we have at the moment is working with the Department for Transport on a programme that's called the Zero Emission Road Freight Demonstrations. And those are starting to fund multi-year on-road demonstrations of zero emission heavy goods vehicles. So battery electric trucks or lorries, or hydrogen fuel cell trucks or lorries. And that program is really important because it's going to understand how well those technologies work in the real world and work to collect data and inform government to help shape future policy around heavy goods vehicles.
What are the big challenges facing you and those working to decarbonise HGVs, given the challenges of charging vehicles and also range?
It's a particularly difficult sector to decarbonise. So heavy goods vehicles use a lot of energy. They often run at relatively high speeds for hours at a time. And when we think about fossil fuels, they have the advantage that the embedded energy is essentially free, and then it's also very dense, so you can quickly refuel a vehicle with fossil fuels. The zero emission or the sort of net zero technologies in battery electric in particular, and also in hydrogen fuel cell, are they don't share some of those advantages. They do have other advantages such as local air quality, but really there are some inherent challenges here that will have to be solved not just by changing the vehicle, but by changing the working patterns and the operations that the vehicle runs with.
Do you feel that the sector is getting a grip on the emissions that come out of HGVs? Do you think that the sector is moving fast enough? And what are you guys at Innovate UK doing to that end?
So the UK's targets around phasing out non-zero emission heavy goods vehicles are very progressive and advanced, particularly compared to some other countries around the world. So at a sort of a government policy level, we've set some very ambitious targets. But I think there's a big challenge in this sector because there is a long way to go, and there's lots of companies that are very keen on doing this, but because of the range of different technologies they can use, they find it hard to know which technologies they should invest in. So whilst there is a lot of appetite to do this, there's a big challenge in figuring out how to do it. The kind of particular point that I want to make clear is that there's so much uncertainty that really it's very hard to do at the moment. But with programs like the zero emission road freight demonstrations, we're starting to show how it can be done and how it can be done in a cost-effective way.
What is the big target, Alistair, when it comes to heavy goods vehicles and decarbonising them?
So the government policies around phasing out non-zero emission heavy goods vehicles by 2040. So that's all of the heavy goods vehicles. And then they have a sort of interim target about the lighter vehicles, so the lower weight categories by 2035.
Alistair, give us an example of a project that you're working on.
So one of the projects I'm particularly pleased with is the battery electric truck trial, or BET project, where we work with funding from the Department for Transport, and we work with Leyland Trucks in the UK, who make and sell and manufacture the electric trucks in the UK. So that project is centered around the challenge of supporting the uptake of battery electric trucks. And a couple of years ago, we realized that there were battery electric truck models that were coming onto the market now, and they were available with short lead times, but really the pull from the market and the pull from businesses was relatively low. And the challenge there is that the vehicles are expensive up front, but no one really understood the lifetime cost and how to get the vehicles operating well and the infrastructure requirements. So the battery electric truck project, it has 20 battery electric trucks, and they are deployed with the NHS and also with various local authorities. And they are swapping out and sort of taking over from the diesel vehicles before them. But they are running normal operations and performing as would be expected. And there is a website where they are showcasing some of the learning from that project and sharing it out to help other companies make this transition and really learn from what we're doing here. So it's a really good project, and it's really great to see it happening.
Josie, could you explain to us what some of the challenges are facing you as you work towards making electric vehicle charging more efficient, more available, and easier for consumers to use so that we can do our bit?
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head there, Matthew. It's all about having the right type of charge points in the right types of locations that will meet users' real needs. And of course, all of our users in different types of vehicles, everything from cars, vans, right up to heavy freight vehicles and off-road plant vehicles as well, all have different use cases. So the times of day at which people can stop to recharge and how much energy they might wish to take on board in what kind of time frame are the critical factors here. So everything we're doing in terms of innovation is trying to make that charging infrastructure more easy to use, more accessible, and more reliable. And many government departments have been funding this in this area over the last few years, because it's all about having really the right amount of energy in the right place and being able to deliver it quickly enough to meet the needs of our users. So that's the big challenge for us. And in that, we have all sorts of different types of places where people might need to recharge, everything from those at home. And then how do we consider the needs of those people that can't park their car off the road when they're at home on their own property? So we need to provide public charging infrastructure for them that can be used in long duration. So when the car's parked for most of its time, for instance. But then at the other end of the extreme, we have the heavy goods vehicles who have really important payload requirements and service needs. That means that they can only stop for a very short amount of time in only very specific places, and maybe then have to recharge overnight back at depot, which means we're putting a massive energy requirement on the grid in some very specific locations where there might not be enough capacity at the moment. So they're the biggest things we're dealing with.
People might have started to hear the phrase V2X. Could you just spell out what that is, Josie, and its significance, please?
Yeah, so V2X stands for Vehicle to Everything Bidirectional Charging. So it means that we can use EVs as mobile battery storage devices. So for instance, we can put energy into an EV's battery when, for instance, renewable generation is plentiful, and then we can move that energy somewhere else in the car and use it later on, for instance, to power a home or a building or another vehicle, or indeed to put it back to the grid when demand on the grid's very high in a constrained location. So it gives us that distributed energy source that can actually mean electric vehicles can help with the increased demands on the grid and the increased demands generally as we turn to electrification for transport and maybe heat and power as well. So it gives us a real opportunity to use those devices in another way, not just for transport, but to meet our energy needs too.
So the hope would be, therefore, to turn cars from damaging the environment into something that actually could positively help the environment.
Absolutely, that's the case. That's exactly what we're striving for, Matthew.
Could you explain to us, Josie, how Innovate UK is working to tackle these issues? I'm thinking specifically of charging, which you've outlined as a challenge. Just explain the ways in which you go about that and how you try to help businesses.
We use funding from government departments such as the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles, the Department for Transport itself, and also the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, which of course has just been renamed as the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. We use funding from them to run public competitions that invite consortia of businesses and academics and local authorities, for instance, users of electric vehicles, to come together to trial new products and services that can help to improve the ease of access to charging, help us to get the right amount of energy in the right places to provide the needs of users, to understand users' needs, because we have so many different use cases. So if I can use the Vehicle to X space as an example, we use funding from the DESNES, however we're going to say that, to support projects that are developing new technology, either hardware or software, and then fund projects which can try that equipment out with real users in real world scenarios. So we funded over 20 projects in the vehicle to grid space specifically between 2018 and 2022. And they've now led, the findings from those have led to a wider Vehicle to X programme, which we've got 17 projects working on now, looking at new products and new software services to encourage consumers to learn more about V2X and to take it on board. And then we hope to launch a new demonstration of those technologies, new competition for that starting in about March of this year.
If we step back just for a moment, Britain has a proud history of industrialisation, has a proud history of manufacturing. Do you think that the UK can now step in and become a superpower, perhaps, if I can put it like that, in the areas of research and innovation and help to lead the world in tackling climate change?
Yes, certainly I do. Coming as I do from the northeast of England, where we have Nissan, who were the very first entrants into the electric car market and have produced the vehicles and the batteries for the whole of Europe up here, I definitely believe this is an area where the UK can excel. And we were very early to develop charging infrastructure that would meet the needs of those earliest vehicles. And the market in the UK is now much, much wider than it was 10, 12 years ago. And we have both large companies and small innovators still moving into this space to develop and move those products much more widely outside the UK as well.
Josie, what is EV Velocity?
EV Velocity was one of the 8 vehicle-to-grid demonstration projects that was funded by BEIS and OZEV back in 2018. It delivered a programme of EV bi-directional chargers in local authority workplaces and in some private workplaces as well, that enabled commercial vehicle users, so mostly van users, to recharge their vehicles at work, but also to store energy in those vehicle batteries and feed it back to the grid in response to demand from the grid for extra energy. So EV Velocity was a really great project led by Cenex with partners from Leeds and Nottingham local authorities and Warwick and Nottingham universities that trialled this in the real world with real users, including, for instance, Nottingham University's security control staff who used electric vehicles all the way around campus to support the staff on campus and the buildings around campus. And they were able to store energy because they have relatively short journeys. We're able to store a lot of renewably generated energy and then put it back into the grid, for instance, in times of need. And the same applied in Leeds local authority area, where a lot of their council vans were electric and were able to store energy when it wasn't needed for transport and put it back into the grid, helping particularly those local authority buildings to run more efficiently and to take recompense from the grid for that energy put back.
Alistair, again, stepping back just for a moment, I wonder whether you feel that science, that engineering, that innovation is right at the forefront, or as much at the forefront as it needs to be in tackling the climate crisis. How much confidence can we have, not just in British innovators, but in innovation right around the world?
Well, I think we should have a huge amount of confidence really in innovation, but I guess that from my perspective, a lot of the technology that we need in this transition already exists, and the innovation that we need to focus on isn't really around, the batteries that are going to exist in 10 or 15 years' time. It's about how to commercialize those technologies and get them into a profitable situation so that companies can utilize them effectively now. So I don't want to rely too much on innovation, because I think a lot of the hard work has already been done, and now we're in the refining stage and not the creating stage.
So what is your message, Alistair, to businesses around the UK? How can you help convince those who are as yet unconverted to the importance of doing their bit? that not only can they play a role in tackling climate change, but they can also be profitable?
I think there's lots of companies that are in different stages in this, some that have the capital to invest now and maybe don't mind too much whether it makes sense. But I think in less time than many expect, it will make commercial sense for a huge amount of these technologies to be rolled out at a really large scale. So companies that haven't invested yet, that's okay. That's not a problem. But I think if they sort of watch they watch what everyone else is doing, then in a very short amount of time to make commercial sense for them to invest as well.
Do you think, Alistair, that UK transport as a sector in its entirety can achieve net zero by 2050? And when I say can, I don't mean is it remotely possible. I mean, do you think it is realistic?
That's a really difficult question. Do I think it's realistic? I think it's definitely possible. I think whether or not it will happen, it's too early to know. But I mean, the UK's a lot of these sort of future transport technologies like battery electric cars rely on green energy to really bring down emissions and to achieve net zero. And the UK's grid is decarbonising at a really rapid pace. We have many announcements of renewable energy production, and those are what are really essential to decarbonising transport.
Josie, would you like more investment from the government? You're kind of an interface, aren't you, between the state and business. Would you like to see more money coming in?
Certainly, always more money is helpful. Businesses would certainly, especially the smaller businesses in our sector, would certainly benefit from more funding in order to kickstart these developments and to help in the space of time where they're not really commercially viable yet, because we haven't got the sheer volume of demand of vehicles on the road yet to use them. But there's no doubt to me that we need to put these innovations in place now in order to be ready and to give our consumers the confidence to convert to an electrified or indeed hydrogen fuel cell powered vehicle as it befits their needs and uses in their everyday life. If we don't have the infrastructure in place, for instance, and reliability and ease of use concerns all taken into consideration, then it will be very difficult to convince the population to convert.
Alistair, how big a role do you feel that Innovate UK is playing in the challenges that face us today?
Innovate UK has a really central role in a lot of the things that are happening in the UK, and it's often behind the scenes. So there are many examples of projects which are doing some really great things, and then when you delve down deep into it, they're receiving funding for Innovate UK, or there's companies involved that have received funding from Innovate UK. So whilst it's not always a sort of public-facing role, Innovate UK's role across all of the net zero areas, it's really not to be understated.
And Josie, what would be your message to British businesses?
We are moving towards decarbonisation of transport, and it's a definite requirement for this country. We have made inroads, we are making progress, and just the very fact that new car sale proportions, which are electric, are now increasing month on month. This is a huge step forward, a real step change in behaviour over the last year or two. And therefore, there's the real opportunity for UK businesses to come into this space to provide services that will support those vehicle users. So now is the time to come forward and to take every opportunity to use government funding where it's available to try out your new ideas and to help commercialise them ready for the market demand.
Alistair, what would you like to see more of? Would you like to see more money? Would you like to see more help? Would you like to have more encouragement from government? Would you like more involvement from consumers, from businesses, from ordinary people? What do you think could really help what you're trying to do at Innovate UK?
Well, I'd like to see more of all of those things, but I think the particular thing that I would like to see more of is more businesses thinking about their employees and how they can help their employees. So an example of this, it's just one example, is companies that run leasing schemes for employees. And could those leasing schemes heavily focus on electric vehicles or only focus on electric vehicles for their employees that they do support in this way? And then what provisions can they offer employees? So that doesn't mean that everyone needs to be able to charge for free at their place of work. There are probably some employees that might struggle to charge a personal vehicle where they live, and can they be helped by having provisions at their place of work? So, and then that extends into the community. So, if your business is situated somewhere that can be used overnight by local residents, could you enable that to happen? So there's so much that we can do with infrastructure if we're willing to collaborate and share. And I think there's a lot that businesses can do just thinking about their own local emissions and their own employees.
And just explain to us, or help us to disentangle V2G, which is vehicle to grid, and V2X, which is vehicle to everything.
Yes, certainly. So vehicle to grid is just one of the types of vehicle to everything. So there are two forms of vehicle to everything that we're looking at in the UK. Grid services, of which vehicle to grid is the one, and behind the meter services, which are things like vehicle to home, vehicle to building, vehicle to load. So that enables you to store your energy and not give it back to the grid, but use it for your own purposes, whether that be to help to power your home, for instance, at peak times, at tea time, or indeed to power a workplace building, or even potentially a public building going forwards. So we're looking at vehicle to X options in all of those spaces.
A final question to you both. I'm going to start with Alistair. Alistair, do you think we will get to a point where goods transport via vehicle is exclusively done electrically?
So it's definitely possible that we'll get to a point where goods transport is done electrically via a vehicle. It's lots of things are going to need to change. So some of the goods that we transport now on vehicles probably should be transported on rail instead, or via waterways. But essentially, there are many studies that show that electric vehicles are capable and will be capable of transporting all the goods that we use.
Josie, how soon do you think it is realistic to live in a world in which we only drive electric cars, that petrol, that diesel are simply eliminated right around the world?
That's the $60 million question. It will take a transition phase. There needs to be time to phase out the petrol and diesel vehicles that are still in use and indeed in some cases still needed for certain uses and applications. But there are plenty of opportunities to start converting things, but not just because we convert from, for instance, a diesel vehicle to an electric vehicle, but also because we change the mode of transport that's particularly used. So, for instance, the push to increase active travel and the use of micromobility, for instance, for last mile deliveries, will all help. It's changing the mode. It's not just swapping a diesel vehicle for an electric vehicle. It's reducing and changing the mix of those vehicles as well. So this transition is a very complex one, but there's no doubt, I know I'm avoiding the question, there's no doubt there are lots of opportunities and lots of options to make these changes happen, but it is going to take time. We are striving towards a 2050 target, and we need to hit that 2050 target, but there are going to be lots of milestones along the way which are challenging in their own ways.
Just to finish, I asked you for your final questions. I just want a final thought, a final message from you both. Alistair, as someone who works at the heart of Innovate UK, what is your message to the rest of us?
So I think consumer awareness is a really important part of this transition. So I'm conscious as well. I mean, I work in this space. I read a lot of reports. I listen to podcasts. I watch videos. I speak to lots of different people about it. But there are certain sort of news outlets in particular, or people that sort of talk about electric vehicles, or they talk about the decarbonisation of transport, and some of the assumptions they make, or some of the points that they make, are just not up to date, or not grounded in fact. So I think we all have a role here to try and make sure that the information that we take in and we understand and we talk about is factually grounded and is up to date.
Josie?
We're in exciting times, and it's great to be at the vanguard of something like this. And if we can try and help people to understand that through the consumer awareness schemes that Alistair's touched upon there, and by providing more information in an easily accessible way for the general population, then we're going to be able to help to move that forwards. But there is also another point, which is about, especially in these strange times, about cost of all of these things. And so we do need, in my opinion, we need more efforts and more work to bring the cost of these solutions down, to make them more accessible for the mass population, which we need to target.
Alistair Barnes and Josie Wardle, thank you both so much for joining me on Let's Talk Decarbonisation.
Thanks, Matthew.
Thank you.